This is the vlog for August 8, 2018, or no, excuse me, August 28, 2018. Um, and I'm doing a lot better today. It was a lot less stressful at work. I didn't keep any anger on the way home. I just feel better. Part of it is just the weather has been so much nicer than it has. Um, Yesterday was pretty nice, but I was too distracted to really enjoy it. Today was just as nice, and I took a moment to let it sort of sink in. I feel a lot better now. I feel a lot better right this instant because I just finished watching a 48-minute long gameplay demo of Cyberpunk 2077. Now, this is a game that I had believed to be in development for around 5 or 6 years, which in terms of the video game industry is really long. A game that's in development for more than 3 years is something that's really being carefully built, and anything past 5 years is probably sort of doomed by its own age. A game usually adopts the level of technical power and graphic fidelity from when it's first put into production. So a game that only takes 2 years to make will look like a game that has had all the latest sort of bells and whistles added to it. It will have lots of cool post-processing effects like bloom or dynamic lighting or not stereo, but lots of cool stuff. On the other hand, a game that has been in development for a long time, because it hasn't had a chance to absorb all of that newer technology, generally looks a bit dated upon release. An excellent example of this is actually World of Warcraft. World of Warcraft had been in development since basically before Warcraft 3 was released. So Warcraft 3 was not a technically taxing game. It was designed to run on weak computers because that's been Blizzard's operating philosophy for 20 or 30 years now. Make games for everyone that anyone can run on any computer within reason. So World of Warcraft, when it came out, didn't look as technically robust as its major competitor at the time, EverQuest 1, and definitely less graphically special than EverQuest 2, which came out just a month after World of Warcraft did. And a lot of people thought that World of Warcraft was going to be doomed from the start, but the fact that EverQuest 2 had so many issues with its gameplay and getting that high-tech engine to run well on anyone's computer, World of Warcraft ended up being a major success. But it was only 4 years ago that World of Warcraft finally updated its character models to have high-definition textures and models with a triangle count, poly count, roughly 4 to 5 times what the original models had. They look spectacular now, but they still have that sort of cartoony quality that has been a Blizzard staple for most of its existence. So, Cyberpunk is being made by Project Red. I think that's what it's called. They're the people that make the Witcher games. And while the teaser trailer for Cyberpunk 2077 was released back in 2013, 5 years ago, the game didn't actually enter production proper until Witcher 3 was released in 2015, which means this game has actually only been in real development for like 3 years, which is, as I said, a pretty long time. But 3 years ago, we had some really cool technology made available. The Witcher itself was a landmark in visual design, not just high graphic fidelity, but really interesting, look. When you look at it, there's a lot of details to absorb. The color choices mesh well with each other. You have fancy outfits contrasting dark and dingy sort of towns, Some larger cities look much nicer than the rural areas, but the countryside itself is actually quite pristine and green and vibrant. All of those things working in concert created a really dynamic and interesting visual style, which is definitely something that this new Cyberpunk game has absorbed. But I want to talk about something else for a second, because not a lot of people are going to understand that this Cyberpunk game is based on an old pen and paper RPG from the 90s called Cyberpunk. Cyberpunk today is a genre. It describes a generally dystopian future where people are often willing to modify their own bodies, but more than that, they are reliant on technology to sustain them. And technology becomes more of a driving force than any other element of people's lives. The desire to gain more powerful technology, which allows them to live better lives. And this technology and the lengths people are willing to go through to obtain it is the sort of driving force of the stories told in Cyberpunk. Probably the most famous Cyberpunk story is technically called "Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep," but has been adapted to a film that's much more famously known as Blade Runner. Blade Runner isn't necessarily about people modifying their bodies, but it is about technology and intelligence tied to technology, and what people are willing to do to protect technology, to gain technology, and the effect that that technology has on blurring the line between man and machine. The Cyberpunk RPG is definitely in the same vein as games like Shadowrun. Shadowrun eschews the classic Cyberpunk by adding supernatural elements, but Cyberpunk itself is purely tech-oriented and very much inspired by things like Blade Runner, and an old anime I was quite fond of called Bubblegum Crisis, which leads me to my next point. Bubblegum Crisis is one of the first Japanese animations that I've ever watched in Japanese. The only other things that had been definitely anime that I'd ever seen were like Akira when I was very young, the Robotech cartoon, which was originally Macross in Japan. And so seeing a Japanese animated show, it was an original video animation or OVA, so it was actually more like a mini series. Seeing that in Japanese and having to read the subtitles to keep up was sort of jarring at first, but it added so much atmosphere. Bubblegum Crisis itself was heavily inspired by the Blade Runner film and takes a lot of visual cues from it. Bubblegum Crisis was also adapted into a tabletop RPG, pen and paper RPG, by the same company that made Cyberpunk. And R. Talsorian, that company, made a third game called Mechton Zeta, which was a giant robot RPG that I was deeply in love with when I was a teenager. And I had the great honor of meeting its author, Michael Pondsmith, when I used to work at a game store locally. And he was a semi-regular who came down to the store a few times. And he signed my copy of Mechton Zeta, which I still have somewhere in a box or on a shelf. And he was just a really cool guy who was willing to talk with a nerdy little fan like me, who was still in college at the time. And to hear his name mentioned in this gameplay video for the 2077 Cyberpunk game was really cool. Just knowing that all of what I was seeing originated from a guy that was just, a cool regular, a cool guy who worked over at Microsoft and remembered making all these games for R. Talsorian and had time to chat. It was awesome. And I can't believe how much I am looking forward to this game. I want it like I want my next breath of air. It is just exactly... I don't generally enjoy Fallout games because the whole notion of spending all your time trying to survive feels like a distraction to me. I want more interesting stories. I want worlds that are full of people because people are what move stories forward. and a dystopian future that is not post-apocalyptic, like what Cyberpunk offers, is right up my alley. One of my other favorite animations of all time is the really sort of monument to Cyberpunk, Ghost in the Shell. And I got so many vibes from Ghost in the Shell just watching this gameplay video. I cannot wait to go make my version of V the Mercenary, the bionic superhero, basically, of Cyberpunk. It's going to be a grim and dirty and dangerous place, but I can't wait to jump in and hack it. So, let this be a lesson. While your day might not be doing so well, tomorrow will be better.